And I'm very excited about today's fireside chat. Firstly, because of our guest, Professor Bhattacharya. He is widely known, particularly for his research on what consumers really think about corporate responsibility and do they actually appreciate it? Is it relevant for their purchase decisions? Being educated as a philosopher, for me, with your research, we enter the era of enlightenment because we changed from mere belief to empirically grounded knowledge.
There's a lot of interest and enthusiasm in CSR, corporate social responsibility. All the Fortune 500 companies have parts of their websites dedicated to what they do in the corporate responsibility arena, and spend millions of euros or dollars on this issue. The question is why? Let's say we have three options, right, that you have. So three choices, a multiple choice question for you. So there is a positive relationship between investing in corporate responsibility and financial performance. There is no relationship, right? There's a negative relationship. So how many of you think it's positive? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I won't count. Okay, some. How many of you think that there is really no relationship? You do something, Okay, there are a few. How many of you think that if I invest in corporate responsibility, it's my financial performance goes down?
Radical minority.
Right. Okay. How many of you don't know? And didn't raise your hand. You can't raise your hand multiple times. You can only raise your hand once.
You can only choose one because it depends, of course, of your strategy, of your sector, of your company. In some cases, it has a positive, I'm sure, relation. In some, it doesn't.
Very clever.
So
okay.
This is why I raise my hand every time.
So in an exam, you would have checked all the options, and then you would get a 0. You have to learn to take a stand. So as it turns out, so McKinsey did this study. They did a survey of CFOs, investment professionals, corporate responsibility professionals, asking this exact same question. What is the link between investing in corporate responsibility and financial performance? The largest proportion of people answered that they don't know, right? And the largest proportion of the corporate responsibility professionals answered that they don't know. Now, if they don't know what the link is, how are they going to invest? How are they going to convince their management to kind of, invest in this thing? So there clearly is a need to understand. If the answer is it depends, or in some cases it's positive, in some cases it's negative, then we really need to understand as management what are those conditions under which it actually pays to invest, and what are those conditions where we shouldn't do it. So that's really kind of what I'm headed towards right now. If you think about the ways it creates value, you'll see that there are a set of direct routes to creating value, and there are a set of indirect routes. And let me explain what I mean. So let's say these beautiful chandeliers here, and we turn off the lights of this room as we walk out, right? So when we turn off the lights, we are doing two things. Directly. We are saving money on our electricity bill. That's a saving, comes into the bottom line. And we are conserving energy, which is, we are creating some social value, which is energy is a precious resource. We're conserving it. However, there is another source of value, which is how do the people who are walking out of the room, so let's say all of us are walking out of the room and someone, Susanne and Michael, they turn off the light. How do you perceive them to be as an organization? So how do you interpret that organization which undertakes a socially responsible initiative? How do stakeholders react to corporate responsibility initiatives, right? So the indirect route is far more complex, right? Because there are different pieces of information about companies that are out there and about their corporate responsibility initiatives. So consumers interpret this information and come to some kind of an overall assessment of what the company is. Right? So it's fairly complex, point number one. Point number two, different consumers may have different ideas about the same company, even the same information. And I want to tell you now, through the research over the last 10 years or so, I have distilled it down to to three main factors that drive stakeholders' reactions to these corporate responsibility initiatives. These three factors, I call them the three U's. First factor is understanding. Now, it seems obvious, but what's a prerequisite for understanding is awareness. The first necessary condition is that consumers are aware of what you're doing in the social responsibility arena. Across many studies, I have found that consumer awareness tends to hover around 20%. So the first task is companies need to work on increasing awareness. But that's easier said than done, because how do we talk about social responsibility? It's always a big challenge, because we will be chastised for self-promotion, etc. And that's where I give the advice to companies, tell, don't sell. So, tell your stakeholders what difference you're making in the marketplace, what your initiatives are. Don't try to make that into a promotion of how good you are. You've got to tone that down. We can talk more about that. But awareness. The second factor, the second component of understanding is probably the most interesting one as far as I'm concerned, and that's called attributions. What does attributions mean? Attributions means, what do people make of the fact that you engage in social responsibility initiatives? An interesting thing that came out in my research is that consumers are perfectly okay if a company has a business motive in being socially responsible. As long as they have the community's interest, as long as they have the social motive and the environmental motive, it's okay to have a hybrid motive. So one thing I tell companies all the time is that the only way to get the value from corporate responsibility is to show people that you can make a difference, that you are making a difference in the social arena and in the environmental arena, right? Which is why we come to the title, putting the social back in corporate social responsibility. So in other words, if you cannot create social value through your CSR initiatives, you cannot create business value. Second thing I said was usefulness. If your stakeholders don't care about the cause that you engage in, then they're unlikely to reward you for it. So the need for self-esteem, for instance, right? And particularly for employees, they come out and say in interviews that they feel better about themselves. So we have to figure out what kinds of needs, what kind of psychological need is my social responsibility program actually fulfilling amongst consumers? Is it useful? Is it actually delivering some psychological value or not? If it's not, then it's unlikely that in the long run they will, get that deep attachment that you need for them to reward you by buying your product. The third thing is unity, which is a very, very powerful concept. The third U. Unity is basically the idea that you develop a connection between the company and you as a human being, as an individual. So all of us want a social identity. What is the one social entity that takes up a lot of time and a lot of our energy and effort? It's the corporation. So the corporation has emerged as a major force. So now we are looking to affiliate as consumers and employees. We are looking to identify with companies that we care about. When you have that sense of identification with the company, then good things happen. You want to buy the company's products. You want to spread good positive word of mouth about that company. You're resilient to negative information about that company. All phenomenal, very, very desirable outcomes from a business standpoint. How can a company build this bond with customers or employees? Yeah.
I think it's trust.
Okay. So trust is an integral component of building this. So trust can come from good products, it can come from good service, it can come from being transparent about your practices. Yeah. And CSR is one of the major drivers of trust. If a company has actually, again, shown that it is sincere in the social arena, in the environmental arena, that is a platform for an overlap of values. So an overlap of values is very very, very important for this unity to happen. Right? So to recap, it's really these three things: the understanding, the usefulness, and the unity. If you have those, the company has to really kind of work on achieving those. They don't happen by accident. You have to be strategic. You have to work on these three levers for this positive outcome to come. Right? So that's kind of the individual level story. Now, when you aggregate up, what does it look at the market level? Because I was asked this question. Okay, so is there any relationship to market value of the firm, profitability, these kinds of things? Because so far we are talking about individual consumer reactions. And the answer is yes, there is some relationship. I've actually done statistical studies where we've taken market value data and CSR data and tried to relate the two of them statistically. And these two charts show the moderated effect of CSR on firm value. So what's happening is that when a product is perceived to be of high quality, when companies invest in corporate responsibility, they gain market value. But if your product is perceived to be of mediocre quality or low quality, then investing in corporate responsibility doesn't help. So in other words, think about your own lives or our own lives as consumers. If I am interested if I'm in an airline situation, I'm stranded, right? Familiar story, right? And I want help, or I missed my connecting flight and I want help. If I cannot get the airline person to talk to me, to help me out in my time of need, would I really care that it's a socially responsible airline? I'm not going to cut it any slack for that, right?
Still, not very many companies follow that path, and yeah, it's good for business. Here is the proof. We do it. We follow that. Still, there are maybe 5% of the companies, 10%, who have really found out there is this market value for us because we follow a social responsibility path. Why is it that there are still so few companies who got the message? And
it's probably because I don't have a good agent. I think I should talk to you later on. Okay. Maybe you can represent me.
Okay, we talk about Germany. Yeah, right.
I think there's a huge cultural resistance to this kind of thinking. Why? It's because this is not the way we were trained to think. I mean, who are the people at the top of companies today? I mean, they are people who are, at best in their 50s, let's say mid-50s, 60s. When these people, went to graduate school or started their jobs, maybe 30 years ago, it was about maximizing profit. It was about the financial market. It is still about the financial market.
I mean, if I understood you correctly, your research gives me quite a bit of an explanation why so many stay away from it and why they are maybe even well advised to stay away from it. You expose yourself in a way that audiences, the public will take a closer look on everything else you do, so you'd better be very consistent, one of the things you emphasized, and you'd better be really good in everything you do. So I understand quite well why it's the IBMs and the Deutsche Banks and those guys who are out there with high-level programs, and why so many others would rather stay away from it. But what do I tell those, like leave that corporate citizenship CSR stuff and do your homework first? Or?
Unwelcome as it is, I mean, that's probably the right message to give. Now, it is possible that everybody does not have the same bad experience at the airline that I do. So again, I mean, it's an individual level phenomenon. So it's good for companies to have a presence in the field. Should they go overboard? I think before they go overboard or before they integrate it into their strategy and do something, substantive, they need to do research to figure out, I mean, how it's kind of coming across to people.